And in breaking news, an historical world event is...
Good morning, everyone. We're going to start in just a minute. We're just going to share the screen. And I would just like to start off by wishing a very happy birthday to Mervin Chatz, who just joined the shir. Mervin, it's your 83rd Hebrew birthday today. So we wish you a very happy birthday. Wish you lots of bracha and hatzlacha, material and spiritual success and prosperity and all good things for the coming year. And at the same time, I'd like to seize the opportunity to dedicate today's shiur to the memory of Chaim Cohen's son Moshe. And please God, his neshama should have an aliyah. And the ultimate aliyah is when we're reunited together here in this world with the coming of Mashiach. So we wish Chaim long life as well. We're going to begin in a moment. In the meantime, make yourselves comfortable, grab your coffee, and give it a minute while we welcome our various groups in. So just one more moment and we'll be ready to start.
Hi, Mervin, Benzi 5 speaking, wishing you a happy birthday, many, many more in good health and lots of joy and positive experiences.
Amen. Does the birthday boy want to share a word or two? Mervin, if you want to say anything, feel free to share it, to give us a little toast on your birthday.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Much appreciated. It's my bar meet today.
Oh, that's right. 82, your bar meet. That's
yeah.
Your second bar meet.
Yeah, second bar meet. I really appreciate your warm greetings. Thank you.
Okay, we're wishing you only the best.
Thank you. I've had a good, blessed life and a wonderful life with my wife. It's much to be grateful for.
Well, there's many more years to come.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Good. We're nearly ready to begin. We're just, at the moment, what I'm doing is I am sharing the shiur on our, what do you call these, social media platforms. I don't know, when I'm multitasking, I lose my train of thought, what I want to say, because I'm doing multiple things at once. Okay, so today's shiur, I'll just finish the sharing of it before I begin actually sharing my thoughts, is called Consumer Culture, Balancing Mind and Matter. Now that could sometimes be a tough call for many. How do we do that balance? And especially in light of Pesach, so there's a lot that we want to discuss and share and analyze about this as we do in our shiurim here. So in a moment, we're going to begin and we're going to look at, if you think of modern society today, people are consumed, we call it consumers. There's a lot more consumption than contribution. There's a lot of that going on of people just consumed with their gadgets, with their technology, with anything and everything people can get their hands on. It's just, that's unfortunately the reality of our times, that people like things. And a lot of people certainly don't look, a lot of the elders oftentimes tell the youngsters, can't you find more substance, more meaning in life? Can't you do things that aren't as materialistically oriented? Just think about life. Everywhere we turn, we see a lot of stuff. Right? We're bombarded each and every day with reminders of all the many things that we need to have. We need this, we need that, we need the other. Any TV commercials telling you what you need to get. And you can't live without these things. Life just can't exist without all the stuff. You need this gadget and you need this thing and the other thing. So, perhaps 20, 30 years ago, you were able to if you had a nice, comfortable home, you felt good, you felt rich, you felt like you had everything you need. And today, things have advanced drastically. right? We have our phones and our tablets and our gadgets and this, that, and the other. And within each gadget, we have to have our apps and our widgets and our services and a product and this subscription and that subscription. And people have this car and just so many things and accounts and you name it. The marketing is bombarding us with everything we need to have. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you in any way think, ladies and gentlemen, that we can live our lives today comfortably without all of this stuff? Do we really need all this shtick in our lives? Do we? What do you think? Is it necessary? What's the Jewish view on all of these extras? You ever wish you could be placed back in the shtetl for a little while with no phone buzzing and no credit card bills and no need to decide which brand of shampoo you need to get and which dog food or cat food or paper towels or ich weiß nicht was? You know what I'm saying? Gotta sprinkle a little bit of Yiddish in. I mean, how much stuff does a person really need? So that's what I wanted to talk a little bit about today, about the Torah's position on this matter. What is the Jewish view on indulgence? Is there any merit of amassing wealth, of having a lot of stuff? What do you think? Anyone want to share your perspective, your opinion? Feel free to chime in, please. We want this to be an interactive discussion. Yes, Benzi.
Hello. I think one has to differentiate between what enhances spiritual upliftment and connectivity with Hashem and all the fancy doodahs which are mere wants and not essential. And I think just on the spiritual level, one of the big positives, we talk of the gadgets and what have you, but the connectivity to the Rabbonim all over the world and illustrious speakers to put us in immediate touch. We don't have to have Sinai and Darbers once a year and fly out a select few brilliant speakers, but we've got this now virtually on tap. The world has become far smaller and accessible to our benefit. It's got to merely be properly used.
Absolutely. Certainly that's the theme we've been carrying here in our shiurim. And I guess we could just finish up here because that's pretty much my answer. But the truth is I want to elaborate a little bit. But yes, very well said. It all depends on what purpose you put to it, what meaning you give it, how you use it. Of course, Judaism places, hundreds of, or rather, we have to have a balance in life. But if you think about it, on the one hand, we have many rules and laws and strict prohibitions and restrictions. You think about Jewish life. Just think about Meghan Markle and Harry in the media these days. We always apply our message and lesson, its relevance to our lives. From the Torah's perspective, the Torah says, "Va'atem tiyu li mamlechas kohanim v'go kodesh." You should be a holy kingdom. You should be a nation of priests. Each one of us, you and I, we are all princes. We are all princesses. Every single one of us, correct? So if that's the case, just think about, yes, in Buckingham Palace, they have many rules and laws and strict restrictions, how they're meant to dress and what they're meant to eat and what their schedules are. And guess what? In Judaism too, we have many laws about our diet, about our marital relations, about the way we dress, what we wear, every aspect of life. So we could find many relevant messages in the current affairs. Just look at the current news, and there's so much we could take from it. You can't just do whatever you want, whenever you want. You have to curb your animal instincts. We have to show restraint. Maybe that's what happened. Unfortunately, many Jews choose a different path, say, I can't handle this lifestyle, it's too much for me, and they abandon it, unfortunately. And perhaps that's what we're seeing with Meghan and Harry. I don't know. I don't know what to believe, what not to believe in the media stories. I'm not taking any sides here. But the point I'm making is that there's a whole lot that the Torah tells us, there's a whole lot the Torah doesn't tell us. There's 4 volumes of Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, but there's a 5th volume called Common Sense. Okay, it's not a book. It's something we each have to apply in our own minds. And there are things that the Torah doesn't tell us specifically. So it's true, while an observant Jew might not be able to eat in the fanciest non-kosher restaurants, and I know some people here think present company excluded, but in our community, I forget the name of the restaurant, Turn and Tender, and there's another one, whatever the case is. They even have a kosher section, but there's no mashkiach, so I don't know how they're careful that things don't get mixed and the dishes that are separated. But I guess it's a step that we should certainly recognize, although sometimes I believe that we can't give credit to something that's just there's a cognitive dissonance. I want to keep kosher, but I'm going to a non-kosher restaurant, but they're serving me kosher food, but not kosher dishes. That's a little bit, anyways, I shouldn't digress. The point I'm making is that if we think of all this exotic and luxurious experiences of life, and the question I asked you a moment ago, I'm losing my train of thought here, is what does the Torah say about, what's the Torah's view, perspective on all this luxury of life? And the truth is, in today's day and age, you can go on the most kosher, luxurious cruises. I believe, in fact, the world's first cruise that's going to be departing, brand new cruise that's happening, COVID-safe cruise, is actually going from Israel, because Israel is considered the safest country in the world currently in regards to COVID, because of the sheer quantity of the percentage of the population that has been vaccinated. What am I trying to say is that, yes, you have kosher 5-star holidays. You could come on a Pesach retreat with us. You could experience the best out there in the world. And there's no Torah prohibition anywhere against experiencing luxuries of life. You could buy a Rolls Royce, a Bentley. You could own a private yacht or a private jet for that matter. So for the religious pleasure seeker, in fact, I see there's a new magazine that's coming out of New York. It seems to be, again, totally cognitive dissonance. A kosher magazine of all the luxuries of life. Basically, I don't know which magazines you can compare it to that are out there that tell you of the luxury cars and yachts and travel experiences and food, kosher. But of course, it lacks that sensitivity of what Judaism is meant to be about, that, what we call it, erlich, that there's a term in Yiddish, forgetting which term it is I'm trying to use, but about being edel, that's the word, edel, just being sensitive. But there's no doubt that you could be a religious, kosher pleasure seeker and enjoy life with all the luxuries of life. But is that indeed appropriate? And certainly it would seem that there's a strong case to be made that, on the one hand, some will tell you the Torah wants us to shun the extras of life. Benzi, you made a good case why we shouldn't shun it. Think about all the benefits we could glean, we could get from it. So aside from actual prohibitions that are recorded in the Torah that we know, right? We also find many expressions in the Torah of telling us to perhaps lead a life that's not indulging, right? Our purpose in this world is to refine ourselves, to become better people, to connect with the divine, not to fill up on all the I don't know, indulgences that life could offer. And since the fine luxuries of life often distract us from spiritual pursuits, they probably or possibly, again, open for discussion and debate. Should they be engaged? Should we indulge? Should we abandon? Should we not engage with them? So on the one hand, we want to live a fully spiritual, good life. On the other hand, look at this verse in the Torah. Let me just pick it up here. Here's what the Torah says. Here we go. Says the Torah, Hashem said to Moshe, speak to the entire congregation of the children of Israel, Kedoshim to you. You should be holy. Yes, you hear these words? Ki kadosh ani Hashem elekechem, for I, Hashem, your God, am holy. We're going to read this actually in 2 weeks' time. It's in the parsha of Kedosh, right? We're going to read this parsha in just a few weeks' time. What does it mean to be holy? What do you think this means? So you could see the text below you. The Talmud understands this as a commandment that kadesh atzmecha b'mutalach, Sanctify yourself by refraining from that which is forbidden to you. Abstain. So that's one thing the Talmud said. Abstain from that which is forbidden to you. But the Talmud discusses this, further. And in fact, there's a Hasidic expression. I actually have it as one of the slides. I'll put it up in a minute. That obviously, what's forbidden is forbidden. What's prohibited is prohibited. But real self-improvement, real divine service comes from a more strict spiritual diet, where we're really a little bit stricter on ourselves. Right? You have to really avoid getting caught up in the pleasures of life if you want to live a meaningful life. And by the way, I believe it goes both ways. Think of that. Nobody ever broke a diet on a massive chocolate cake. It was a little cookie, a little biscuit, and then just a little bit more of ice cream. Just, it's so good. I want a little bit more, another spoon, another. And before we know it, we ate the whole tub of ice cream. Or you could compare it to any other breaking of our religious, of living a spiritual lifestyle. And the same thing, when we want to grow spiritually, we want to develop ourselves and become better human beings, better Jewish people, better, more committed to our Torah's lifestyle, then we also have to set our goal and realize it's going to happen. It's going to happen incrementally. One mitzvah and another mitzvah. One good deed leads to another, as the Mishnah says. One avera, one transgression leads to another, and one good deed leads to another. In fact, we're supposed to study Pirkei Avot today, so that's the Pirkei Avot aspect that I'm sharing with you. A tool for life. There's another understanding of the meaning of that Mishnah. One mitzvah leads to another mitzvah. The idea is one mitzvah. The meaning of the word mitzvah is not only a good deed or a commandment. That's one meaning. Mitzvah also means a connection. So you could say mitzvah gereret mitzvah, by fulfilling a command and instruction of God. By doing one good deed, it leads to a mitzvah, a connection, a stronger bond with Hashem that we forge, that we connect with God. And I hate to use the word forge, because forge sounds like it's fake. But no, forge means that you're enforcing. It's becoming a better relationship. Think about any relationship you're cultivating in your life. When you do, it doesn't just like that happen that all of a sudden overnight two people become best of friends. But the gestures, one kind deed after another, leads to a meaningful and purposeful and flourishing relationship. So I want to take us now into the commentary of Ramban, Nachmanides, because Nachmanides actually understands this verse that God says to be holy. And we'll spend more time on that in a few weeks after Pesach when we read this and learn this parsha. But Ramban, Nachmanides tells us that he says there's a concept called naval b'reshus haTorah. What does it mean to be naval b'reshus haTorah? The idea is a person can be a hedonist with the Torah's permission. Like I said, you could go on kosher cruises, you could go to kosher restaurants and indulge in kosher food, but you're not utilizing it in a proper way. We could have a kosher internet, but we're squandering our day away. You understand? I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not visiting websites that are inappropriate. But if I'm wasting my time, if I'm not utilizing it in a proper way, perhaps that's just wasting time. Nachmanides is saying, a naval b'reshus haTorah, a hedonist at the Torah's permission, someone who's indulging in permissible pleasures. What's the difference between a person who's stuffing his face with sushi and steaks and pizzas and you name it, and someone who's doing something else? Yes, it's kosher, but it's not refined. I'm not violating any transgression of the Torah. But what happens is I'm getting into this narcissistic, self-indulgent atmosphere. And this, Nachmanides says, we can read his words very briefly, the Torah prescribed certain sexual practices. The Torah forbade certain foods, but it permitted relations with one's wife and the consumption of meat and wine. Now the glutton may therefore find license to be lecherous with his wife or his many wives. Don't forget, in Torah law, polygamy is allowed. It was only with the invention of the credit card that it was banned. Just joking. A person could be inebriated with wine or gorged with meat. Reading his words, he might speak profanity without compunction, since the Torah records no such prohibition. And in the process, he would be considered a vile and dissolute person that is nevertheless acting within the boundaries of the Torah. He's not violating any transgression of the Torah. Therefore, says the Torah, Kedoshim tiyu, you should be holy. Why does the Torah tell us this? It's mentioned after the Torah has detailed all of the activities that are to be curtailed entirely. For it presents us with a general and comprehensive command that we are to be separated from overindulgence. That's the words of Nachmanides. So to be a smashing spiritual success, like we quoted Pirkei Avos, we need to be, according to one aspect, according to one teaching in the Mishnah, we got to be minimalistic. How do you be minimalistic? Says the Mishnah, right here, Pirkei Avos, chapter 6, Mishnah 4, that Darka shel Torah, what's the way of Torah? Pas b'melach tochal, eat bread with salt, umayim b'mesura tishta, drink water in small measures, v'ala aretz tishan, and sleep on the ground. V'chaye tsar tichya, live a life of hardship, uvatorah ata amel, and if you do so, says the Mishnah, then you will live, this is in fact, a meaningful life, right? Fortunate are you, and good is for you, fortunate for you in this world, and it's good for you in the world to come. That's the Mishnah. So, seemingly from this Mishnah, for the soul to thrive, the body has to take the cramped and uncomfortable middle back seat. See, my kids argue about that every day. What's going on here? Is the Mishnah encouraging a life of asceticism, separation, of being a hermit, saying you shouldn't indulge in physical pleasures of life? Now, the very foundations, the truth is, if you study Tanya of Hasidic thought, says, no, we have to, in fact, be careful with these physical indulgences. We have to recognize that we have an evil inclination, and we have to fight over it over and over. And the truth is, there's a lot in Hasidus that discusses this. Quoting a teacher, what was his name, Reb Mordechai or a Ducker, and he said, I'm going to put it up here in a second. We have to ask our question: is bread and water the Torah way of life? That's our question. Right? Do we have to be physically cramped for spirituality to thrive? So here are the words of the Rebbe quotes it in Hayom Yom, but it comes from it's a Hasidic expression. It says, "Was men tornit tormenit," which means what is forbidden is forbidden. Yes? Was men meg darf man it. And what is permitted is you don't have to indulge in. It's unnecessary. You hear these words? What's permitted is unnecessary. What does this mean? What's the understanding of this teaching? It's a Hasidic aphorism that's saying that you don't have to indulge in even something permissible in life. I see that we have quite a few people who ran away from the shir. This isn't such attractive material. It seems like people aren't loving to hear this. Okay, no one else is allowed to leave. I'm locking you in. So it seems that minimalism is the Torah way of life. But before we jump to conclusions and start, I don't want anybody going onto these diets and fasting for weeks on end. You know, in the restaurant, they asked me, do you want a Diet Coke? I said, no, I don't want a diet, right? We have to be aware that there's another very different side to the story. And this is Benzi's perspective that Benzi, you mentioned earlier, that we have to understand as well. And to really, truly get into that, let me quote to you some words from the Talmud about the Nazir. You're all familiar with the Nazirite, right? A Nazirite, there are different types of people. There are many types of vows that a person could take. And one could take a vow that they will do something, or you could take a vow that you won't do something, right? For instance, one type of vow recognized by halacha is when a person says, I vow that I'll donate 1,000,000 rands to Chabad. Another type of vow is when a person says, I vow that I will not eat prime rib for the next year. So the laws of vows are discussed extensively in halakha. And there are many specific rules about what's considered a valid vow, what constitutes a violation of that vow, how such a vow can actually be absolved. We know that before Rosh Hashanah, we do something called Hataras Nadarim. And the truth is, there's even some of that that's done before Pesach, Prusbul, certain years. So it would seem from all these laws that there's a value in taking certain vows, right? Especially if we are going to refrain from a gluttonous, indulgent, narcissistic behavior. And in fact, from what we're discussing here so far, I would think that perhaps minimalism is a better way to go. Live a more spiritual lifestyle. By the way, these days, there's a whole movement about minimalism, about, people living in these tiny little homes. They started building in New York. I can't tell you the exact square, I think like 300 square feet. That's like 30 square meter apartment. Could you live in a 30 square meter apartment? Maybe. They designed them in a way that's so minimalistic that the bed folds down, and then when you're done sleeping, your bed folds up, and underneath the bed is a table that folds out. It's incredible to see these tiny apartments, and they're legal because it's a whole movement in the world, minimalism. And now before Pesach is a great time to probably do some good spring cleaning, even though here in South Africa it's autumn, fall cleaning. But it's always good to do some cleaning and to purge, get rid of certain unnecessary things we sometimes buy on, Shul yesterday, I was chatting with somebody. He was in the shop and just bought something because it was on sale. And I said, that used to be me. I used to just buy things on sale, and then they're just sitting around the house, okay? And maybe with rabbinic salaries, we can't even buy things just because they're on sale. That's a different note. But point is, minimalism is certainly a lifestyle these days. And the Talmud seems to be telling us that we should be perhaps seeking that type of a lifestyle. But don't get caught up so quick. Let me share with you something from the Jerusalem Talmud right here. What does it say in the Gemara? Rav Dimi said in the name of Rav Yitzchak, is what the Torah has forbidden not enough, that you assure further prohibitions upon yourself? You hear? Isn't that interesting? Didn't we just say that it's a good thing to have this minimalistic type of lifestyle, to refrain from excessive indulgence in physical things? Not to pursue every luxury out there. And yet, Rav Dimi saying in the name of his teacher, Rabbi Yitzchak, that no, what the Torah prohibited is not enough. You're going to add extra. In fact, the Torah itself says don't add and don't subtract. So let's understand the case of the Nazir. The Nazir is a textbook case of abstinence. A person realizes that every time he gets drunk, he says stupid things. And it's not helping his marriage, his relationships with others, with God. So he makes this courageous decision, says, no more, enough is enough. Impressive? You think so? Well, let's see what the Talmud says about the Nazir. Here we go. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Lazar Kapper says the esteemed one. The esteemed one says, what is the meaning when the verse says, we have a verse in the Torah that says regarding the Nazir, and make atonement for him for he sinned by the soul. Okay? Why does it say these words, that he sinned by his soul? With which soul did this person sin? What's wrong with being a Nazir? A Nazir is abstaining from physical indulgence in this world. No. Says the Gemara, rather, in afflicting himself by abstaining from wine, he is considered to have sinned with his own soul. He must bring a sin offering for the Nazir itself, for it being a Nazir, for causing his body to suffer. If a person afflicting himself by abstaining only from wine is called a sinner, one who afflicts himself by abstaining from everything, through fasting or other acts of mortification, all the more so is he described as a sinner. So the Talmud is calling him a sinner. Why is he a sinner? Because he deprived himself of God's blessings. The Gemara is saying a person is obligated to say, B'shvili nivra olam, God, the entire world is created for my sake. I was created to serve my master, my creator. Not only the necessities of life, the Talmud is telling us that we are to enjoy life in this world. Carpe diem, seize every moment. Enjoy the pleasures of life. Go experience, go see the world, enjoy the pleasures. And let me share with you one more thing the Gemara says here. Rabbi Cohen, in the name of Rav, says, a person will have to answer for everything that his eye beheld and he didn't consume. You hear that? So now we have two opposites. First, we're promoting a life of asceticism, denying ourselves the pleasures of life that the Mishnah says, subside on bread and water, that you can live a more spiritually fulfilling life. On the other hand, I just gave you other quotes that says that you should make use of every physical pleasure of this world, every opportunity you have. You should enjoy what your eyes see, obviously what's permissible, because we say in our prayers 3 times a day, you should not follow the pursuits of the inclination of your heart. So which one should we do? Should we pick that minimalistic lifestyle and risk being a sinner? I need to answer everything that our eye beheld and we didn't enjoy? Sorry, I'm confusing my question. Should we be basically minimalistic and ascetic? Or should we go out there and, what's the word? Hakuna matata. Just enjoy life, all the fun stuff, as long as it's permissible, of course, but then risk forfeiting our chance for that spiritually meaningful, fulfilling lifestyle that we described earlier, which is the doctrine of iskafia that Chassidus tells us about, which the Mishnah was saying that minimalistic, bread and water. Okay, what does this all have to do with Pesach? Of course, you're wondering, right? So let me ask you, if I were to ask you, what is the Pesach Seder? What would you say? Is it a meal consisting of matzah and wine that we have and whatever delicacies you enjoy here from your Seder plate? That we read the Haggadah? Is it a time where children ask questions and search for prizes? My wife was looking for the best prizes. Remember, I told you in our home the prize is not for stealing the Afikoma, but rather in our home the prize is for who could say the Manishtana nicely. So that's all very nice. But what would you say it is that's the core component of the Seder? Now, we discussed many things over the last 2 weeks that we've been talking about Pesach. And here's something that we're actually going to say in the Haggadah. Let's pull up a text of our Haggadah here. Says Rabbi Gamliel, we mention him in the Haggadah on Pesach night. Whoever does not say does not speak of these 3 things on Pesach at the Seder, has not fulfilled his obligation to relate the story of the Exodus. What are the 3 things? Pesach. Remember the Pesach sacrifice, which we discussed yesterday in great detail. Matzah. Remember the purpose, the significance of the matzah, and maror, the bitter herbs. So if the point of the Seder is to recall our ancestors' emancipation from slavery in the story of our Exodus, then Rabbi Gamliel wants you to know that the Exodus can be summed up in these 3 points: Pesach, Matzah, Maror. Have a discussion on these 3 aspects of the Exodus, and you've done your job. You fulfilled the purpose, according to Rabbi Gamliel, of what the Pesach Seder is all about. The Karban Pesach, which again, we spent time discussing it, maybe we could talk more about it, but that reflects the fact that God passed over our homes, the Jewish homes, during the 10th plague of the firstborn. Matzah reflects how God took us out of Egypt, granting us freedom. B'chipazon, in a hurry we left Egypt. And Maror is recalling the bitter herbs, it's the bitter hardships that we endured as slaves under the whip of Pharaoh and the taskmasters. That's pretty clear. But I want to try to understand a deeper spiritual significance of these. And we'll see how together, Pesach Matzah Maror, how they make up the core of the Seder, and how they're not only three components of redemption, but they're a recipe that we can use to find the correct spiritual balance in our lives. As Benzi said at the beginning of the shir, to have that balance between minimalism and indulgence. It's not an either-or proposition, how we could strike the proper balance. But to do that, we have to go back to the very beginning of the slavery story, which took place long before the Jewish people even arrived in Egypt. I'm talking about in the book of Bereshis, 200 years before Yaakov and his 70 children and grandchildren settled in the land of Egypt. We know the whole story of all the dramatic details of how Yosef becomes the viceroy and how there's a famine in the land and how eventually Yaakov and his family settles there, 70 souls. Long before that, the entire story is foretold by God to Avraham Avinu at the Bris Ben Absarim, at the covenant between the parts. And there, let's pick up that text. Says the Torah, by Hashemesh Lavit, the sun began to set, and a deep slumber fell upon Avram, and behold, a dread of great darkness descended upon him. And Hashem said to Avram, Yodai Teda, you should surely know, Ki ger yezaracha be'eretz lo lahem, that your descendants, your children, should be strangers in a land that's not theirs. Va'avadum, and they will be enslaved. Ve'inu oisam, and they will be tortured arba meo shana for 400 years. The gamas hagoy asher yavodu dananoichi, and also that nation that will subjugate them, that they will serve, will I judge them. Achrechem, and after this, yetzer b'chush gadol, they will go out with tremendous wealth. Now, that I guess you could say is the heavily abridged Exodus story that Avram got, and we know it all came to fruition. It all came to be just as described. Now, because we're short on time, I'm not going to go into all the details of this, but in short, for the purpose of today's discussion, let's focus on the very last part of the story as described to Avraham, that after being enslaved in Egypt, which wasn't 400 years at the end, it was much less, and actually the real harsh slavery was less than a century, but still the whole story itself was 210 years, I think. So focus on the last part. Afterwards, they will go birchush gadol. They will go with tremendous wealth. That's what we just read. How did that wealth come to them? What was the point of it? What was the purpose? This is during the 9th plague that the Jews cashed in on this promise of wealth. The Torah tells us that such an intense darkness descended on the Egyptians in the 9th plague that they remained frozen in their places. At the same time, what does it say about the Jews? That there was or b'mashvaisam. The Jews had light in their dwellings. What was the purpose of this unique plague? Why did God choose to inflict the Egyptians with such an intense darkness that they couldn't even get up from their places? So the Medrash, which I bring here from Rashi quotes the Medrash, tells us that the intention was specifically so that we could go into the Egyptian homes and see what possessions they have, so that when it's time to leave Egypt and the Egyptians, when it comes time for them to pay restitution for all those years of slavery, they can't just throw us some pittance and say, here you go. They say we have nothing. If they lie, Jew could say, I was in your house actually. I know exactly what you have and where you have it. I don't steal. I'm not going to take it on my own, but you owe it to me. I was your slave all these years. You haven't compensated me. Got to pay me. So because of the plague of darkness, we were able to fulfill this command. It was during this plague that we were able to actually go and see what the Egyptians have. So what's the core of the Seder? This is the discussion. Let's quote this. Here we have the verse in the Torah, right at the top text. Says, Daber no ba'aznei ha'am. Please speak into the ears of the people and let them, God telling Moshe, let them borrow each person from their friend, each man from his friend, each woman from her friend, silver vessels and gold vessels. Why was God so concerned with the Jews' material assets? Is it God's instruction to Moshe to tell the Jewish people to borrow from the Egyptians before they leave Egypt? Says the Medrash, again quoted by Rashi, that God was, so to speak, afraid of Avraham taking him to task. That's why God promised them the Jews are going to leave with tremendous wealth. And this is where it's fulfilled. This is the way it was orchestrated. Says Rashi, the Hebrew word na, used in this verse. Na is a request, please. The verse is saying, I ask you, Moshe, to instruct them about this, to ask the neighbors for vessels so that the righteous Avraham will not say, God, you fulfilled your promise that they'll be enslaved, but you didn't fulfill the promise of them having wealth. Now, something about the story is quite odd. Imagine a prisoner sitting in a dark, miserable jail for years. And the warden tells him, soon you'll be free, and we're going to give you all this money to take with. What would he say? You can imagine that he'd say, please, just let me go. Let me be free now. I'll gladly give up the money. Just get me out of here. And this is what the Talmud says. Let's look at the text here from Masechet Brachos. Jews said to Moshe, if only we could get out with our lives. Forget about the wealth. A parable to illustrate this, the Gemara says, is they were like a man who was kept in prison. So essentially, this is what happened to the Jews in Egypt. They were informed that we're going to be freed. And they would have to go around asking the Egyptians for their wealth and basically ransack the country. And quite a few of them must have been thinking, who needs this money? Who needs the wealth? I just want to be free. Why does God even promise this? That first they'll be slaves and then they'll be wealthy. Would you want that for your children? God says to Abraham, your grandchildren will be slaves and then they'll be wealthy. So please, Tumanish Kantayvas, don't do me any favors. Don't talk about the money. And I just want everyone to be happy, healthy, safe. Who needs this? Right? This is not something we need. You know the story, two guys, Marty and Saul, are out in the lake, and all of a sudden the boat starts sinking. So, Saul says, Marty, listen, I don't know how to swim very well. So they start to jump in. Anyways, I'm turning a little joke into a long story. The final point is, he says, you suppose you could float alone? And his friend says, what? Do you think this is the best time to discuss business, finances? Right? There obviously there must have been something important about taking the wealth out of Egypt. And that is what you mentioned, Benzi. And that's really the important point that we want to talk about in our remaining time. What is so important? Why does God have to promise this to Abraham? And then for the Jews alone, why did they have to collect the wealth? Why couldn't they just be freed from their miserable slavery? And perhaps the answer could be that there is a purpose, there is a reason why God promised that they will leave Egypt with all this wealth. That they needed this, that there's a purpose for it. And obviously you could go into the whole story and the history of how they wound up in Egypt and everything that happened there. What was the purpose of going down to Egypt? Why did Joseph need to go down to Egypt and be sold as a slave and go through all the misery that he experienced until his family came down, until he revealed himself to them, until everything that all the Jews wound up as slaves in Egypt? For what reason? For what purpose? So Kabbalah teaches that there's actually a divine energy in Egypt that needed our attention. And it's described in Kabbalah as nitzutzos, which means sparks. These were spiritual sparks that God invested in every physical object in this world. And for many years, that energy languished. It was there in Egypt. It was there. And yet, there was nobody to uplift, to refine, to fulfill the purpose of why those sparks were there. There was so much potential, so much energy bottled up in that spiritual wasteland. Who was going to redeem it? That was our task. God brought us down to Egypt to elevate those sparks. And the truth is, in every single material thing in this world, everything has sparks that need to be refined. So in each jug, lamp, every piece of jewelry, every chair and table in Egypt, they all needed that refinement. That little spark, that energy. Sheila, you keep unmuting yourself. Please keep it muted unless you... So the point is that by using the physical object for a holy purpose, we are able to refine everything in this world. By using our computers, our internet, our phones for shiurim, for learning Torah, that's exactly the purpose that we are fulfilling. So why was collecting riches necessary? Says the Talmud. They despoiled Egypt. This teaches us that they made it like a granary without corn. They made it like a pond without fish. The entire purpose was, why did they go to Egypt? Is in order to fulfill that vision of refining those sparks, collecting the wealth to refine, to uplift the sparks, the potential that was within it. And this idea of redeeming the sparks that is within material possessions is not only relevant to Egypt, but it's relevant to each one of us. As you can see it right here in the words of Rabbi Chaim Vital. He says it's known that the purpose of mitzvahs are to refine, to sublimate the form and the material. The spirit itself does not need refinement. And the only reason it was integrated into the form and the material was to draw down a light that would rectify it. For this is the reason the soul descended upon this world, to rectify and to sublimate it, similar to the exile of the Shekhinah, which is to sublimate the godly sparks that have fallen. So the reason why a soul makes its trek, its journey into this world, for what reason, for what purpose, is to redeem those sparks. Every time we do a mitzvah, what's the purpose of the tzitzis? It's not just a piece of wool, but it's to be used for a mitzvah. Every single item you could think of, when I connect the material matter for a spiritual purpose, I'm fulfilling the purpose, the reason why it's here. So Kabbalah teaches that every single, not only every single thing, but every single soul, you and I, each one of us is here for a specific indispensable purpose in this world that no one else can fulfill. Again, so this is what we have to realize. What is our purpose? Remember Yaakov Avinu, we went back for his pachim ketanim, for his small jugs. You remember he was crossing over the river. He goes back for small jugs because each thing in this world has a purpose. The Torah describes it here. He rose up during the night. He went back, right? Why was he going back? Because those small jugs. And says the Talmud, what significance are these small jugs? Says the Gemara, some small bottles been left behind. This teaches us the righteous value their possessions more than their bodies. What is that meant to mean? So the Gemara explains, because they recognize the divine potential in every bit of matter in this world. They realize what potential there is that needs to be fulfilled. So when our ancestors left Egypt with great wealth, purpose was, again, to uplift, to refine those possessions. So let's go back to our question at the beginning of today's shir about, do we want a life of minimalism or a life of indulgence? Well, Maybe now we're saying we should go into a life of indulgence so we could uplift, or we could refine every spark out there. So the truth is that, as you could see from a Torah perspective, it's all about the balance. And that's why the Torah gives us both extremes. Tells us about a life of asceticism and tells us a life of indulgence. There's got to be that fine balance in our lives. We have to know what to find, where it's necessary for us to refine what aspects of life need our refinement. And so one approach is that you could say, let's connect this with the Pesach Matzah Maror, since we have to conclude in a moment. Let's see it within the Pesach Matzah Maror, okay? What is matzah? Matzah is the humble bread of poverty that our ancestors ate in Egypt, that they ate when they left Egypt. So that is the concept of humility, the bare basics, the bare necessities of life. The Korban Pesach was a young lamb, a kid that was slaughtered. Remember, we discussed that also in great detail, how it was roasted whole and eaten at the Seder in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. Lamb chops, luxuries, right? That's indulgence. So here we're having at the Pesach Seder, on the one hand, the matzah, simplicity. Then we have luxury, lamb chops. And then you have the maror. What's maror? Maror is a vegetable, right? It's horseradish. That represents a middle ground between the two extremes. More than minimalistic matzah, but less than the sumptuous meats. And I want to share this with you in the words of the Rebbe from his diary. This was found in his Rishimos, in his personal diary. And he talks about this idea, how we each have that purpose, that mission in this world to refine the world. It's within each of our responsibilities. So let's just read his words here. He says like this: some things are absolutely necessary. One cannot live without them. Then there are things that are considered luxury items. And some things fall in between these two categories. Using food as an example, the first category would include bread. The second category would include meat. And the third category is the vegetables, which is like bread, it's a staple, but nevertheless, it's not as vital. So hopefully now, I don't know if we could begin or conclude our discussion. It's time to close up shop, to conclude here. But the point is, if we use the Seder plate as our guide of what is the correct balance in between indulgence or minimalism, what's the proper way to use these three? We have Pesach, indulgence; matzah, simplicity; maror, which is the intermediate in our lives. And I think the key lies in the distinction between each of these three. Each one is different from the other, right? Even in the extent that they were observed, the way they were used back in the times of the temple. Ever since the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, we don't offer the Korban Pesach anymore, right? So today, we don't eat that meat. Certainly at the Pesach Seder, you shouldn't braai, you shouldn't roast your meat. I thought that was a question that came last week. And the question was, are we meant to have a braai at our Pesach Seder? And the answer is no. Only in the temple did we have a braai. So that luxury is no longer present. And you could say the temple itself epitomized, represented it was the most expensive building. We gave all our gold, silver, copper, everything to build it. Today we have a shank bone representing it on our Seder plate. And here are the words of the Shulchan Aruch. What does it say? When the temple stood, there was an obligation to ensure that the Korban Pesach was present while reciting the Haggadah. After it was destroyed, the rabbis decreed that we place two types of cooked food on the table while the Haggadah is recited. One to commemorate the Korban Pesach, the other to commemorate the Korban Chagiga, which was the festival offering. So at the end of the meal, we commemorate the mitzvah of eating the meat, which is through the afikoma, right? A piece of matzah. We're not actually eating the lamb chops. This is all a commemoration. It doesn't represent the fulfillment of the sacrifice obligation. We don't have that opportunity today to eat the Korban Pesach. So that's one thing, the luxury which is diminished today. What about the bitter herbs? We do eat maror today, but it's not the full-fledged mitzvah it was in the time when the temple stood. Because according to Torah law, the maror is to be eaten with the carbon pesach, with the lamb chops. When there's no lamb chops, there's no obligation to eat the maror. Of course, we do eat it today. It's all commemorative. It's symbolic that we're eating it to recall the tears. But it's not considered a biblical obligation because we no longer have the actual carbon pesach. On the other hand, eating matzah today is the only biblical mitzvah that we're actually still fulfilling today. And this you could see here in the words of the Shulchan Aruch. The biblical obligation to eat maror applies only when the carbon pesach was offered. By contrast, the obligation to eat matzah on the first night of Pesach is even in modern times still biblically obligated. So this basically sums up our discussion. What is it about the carbon pesach that makes it off limits today? And the maror that is only rabbinically enacted today, and the matzah is the only thing that's still as a biblical obligation. And the answer is that from the moment the temple was destroyed, the world and its spiritual sensibilities have changed drastically. We can't perceive spirituality today as it was experienced in the time that the temple stood. In fact, our sages tell us from the time the temple was destroyed that we no longer have that. In exile, without the godly manifestation that once was, that this temple, that the Beis HaMikdash symbolized and represented, God remains, so to say, homeless. We were expelled from the Holy Land. We were wandering around the world. Even today, when we're back in Israel, it's still not in the ideal state. So ultimately, everything we know is a creation of God. And everything has a purpose to fulfill in this world. Everything that's here, every human being and every item that's created by God has a purpose. And of course, it's our task to refine, to uplift everything. So today, when we don't have a carbon pesach, when we deal with the bare bones, we just have the matzah. That anything beyond what the temple stood for, so to say, the luxury, our sages wanted that a person, we should have a proper balance in life. And so they were concerned that if we didn't have the right balance, we lack that meaning, the purpose of what life is meant to be lived. So therefore, our sages tell us that you want to enjoy the luxuries of life. Ideally, they said, actually, we shouldn't even be eating meat since the temple's destroyed. We do obviously eat meat still, some people, if you're not vegetarian. But nevertheless, let me just quote it to you right here. Here we go. They made the middle category, which is the maror. Even the sages enacted that we still eat it. Why? Well, let me just read these words to you from the Rebbe's writings. He says, the commandment to eat maror does not apply biblically today, right? Why did the sages give it to us? Well, let's conclude at this point. Physical luxury was never intended as an end in itself. It was only as a means to an end. Like you said, Benzi, to use it for a godly spiritual purpose. Right now, we live in a time of exile when we look at fine food and wine, all the luxuries that we mentioned, and we like to indulge in it for our own self-aggrandizement. And the Talmud is saying, we don't use the meat today at our Seder. Yes, you could eat meat, but not as a symbol of the carbon pesach. Okay? So we are permitted. But what's the main thing, staple of the Seder? What's the Mara that the sages enacted? That's about the balance. It's about finding that balance in our life. Yes, the matzah, you need to fulfill your bare minimalistic necessities of life, but the Mara takes us to the next stage. Don't indulge too much. When we consider which gadgets we want to buy, which subscriptions we want to sign up for, which restaurant we want to eat in, we need to make sure that we don't get lost in just the indulgence aspect. We don't want to be the novel B'Rishus Torah, the hedonist who said, well, it's kosher as long as I'm indulging, but it's kosher. Now, we want to find that there's a purpose for it, that there's a spiritual goal. Yes, you could have a nice car if you could afford it. But remember, the car or any other luxury wasn't created just so that we could chase after it and show it off. Use the car to go to good places. Do good things with it. Enjoy all the luxuries of life, but do it in a good way. Let me conclude with two stories that come to mind. One is a story during the time of the Russian Revolution, and many Jews were unfortunately drafted into the Tsar's army, and many Jews unfortunately had to serve in the military there. Once the great rabbi, the Chafetz Chaim, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan, came to visit them. Came to visit the Jewish soldiers to give them some words of upliftment and encouragement. And he sees there a Jewish soldier who's sitting away, biting, like sucking, relishing the meat of pig's meat. I don't know exactly what it was. And the sage just looked at him and just stared at him as the guy's sucking on the bone. And, the young man, the soldier, understood that the rabbi wasn't so pleased with him. So he turned to the rabbi and says, what should I do? I have no choice. I'm serving in the military. They don't give us kosher food. If I don't eat, I'll die. Doesn't the Torah permit me to eat non-kosher food under such circumstances? The Chafetz Chaim looked at him and said, yes, my boy, that's true. But why do you have to suck the bones? It's one thing to eat because you have to. Right? It's an entirely different matter to suck the bones. Go ahead, enjoy life, get a nice new couch, get the latest phones and gadgets. But remember, when you're using it, sit on the couch and study the weekly parsha. Use your latest tablet or phone to connect with a shir. Go get the nicest cuts of beef for Pesach. Enjoy it and invite some guests to have the food with you. But remember, the purpose is not just to indulge in the physical luxuries of this world. Remember that the proper environment, the purpose, what you're trying to do to refine, to uplift, to use the energy to serve God, that's the purpose. And you all know the story, maybe I'll conclude with that video in a minute, of what's the story? Oh goodness. The story goes of a visitor who came to Rabbi Dov Ber, the Maggid of Mezrich, and couldn't believe the poverty that he saw on the rabbi's table. He said, oh my goodness, this rabbi is just living in utter poverty. He doesn't have much food. He's living in such simplicity. And so he asks the rabbi, why are you living so simply? Are you just too poor? Do you need some money? Can I help you? And the rabbi asks him, well, tell me, where are all your luxuries? Where's all your fancy furniture? And he says, well, I have it too, but when I travel, I don't take all that stuff with me. And you know what the rabbi answered? Well, I'm just like you, just traveling through. And let me conclude by showing you the video. It doesn't mean that we have to remove all the furniture from our homes, but when we keep in mind that this physical world and all the luxuries it contains are part of a larger spiritual journey, then we realize that the luxuries, the purpose of enjoying those luxuries in this world is really not for indulgence, but rather to serve our divine purpose in this world. Let's conclude here with this video. Any questions before any questions before we conclude? Let me put that video on for you. I've shown that video to you before, but it's one of my favorites, and it's one of my favorite stories. Oops, let's just share any questions before we conclude here. Okay. Whoops, I'll tell you what I did wrong here. I didn't share the sound. Hold on a second. What do you do when you share the screen without sound? Let's go back. Okay, we're gonna go back here. Oh, here we go, share sound. Okay, ladies and gents, enjoy the video, and with this we conclude.
TorahCafe.com.
I traveled halfway across the world to see a sage. He lived like such a poor man in this day and age. I said, where's your leather couches? Where's your golden chandelier? Where's your walk-in closet for all the stuff you could wear? Well, all you got's that suitcase, my friend, ain't that true? I said, yeah, but you know that I'm just passing through. And that's when he said, I'm just like you. I'm just passing through, just like you. My heart wants to feel something that's real, and my mind hopes to find treasures of another kind. And if you had my eyes, you'd see a palace for you and me. We're living in this town. People say he never really settled down. They say, where's your leather couches? Where's your golden chandelier? Where's your walk-in closet for all the stuff you could wear? The neighbors talk, but they don't understand. The things he's collecting you can't hold in your hand. Like he said, I'm just like you. I'm just passing through, just like you. My heart wants to feel something that's real, and my mind hopes to find treasures of another kind. And if you had my eyes, you'd see a palace for you and me. For you and me. Just like you, I'm just passing through, just like you. My heart wants to feel something that's real, and my mind hopes to find treasures of another kind. And if you had my eyes, you'd see a palace for you and me. My heart wants to feel something that's real, and my mind hopes to find treasures of another kind. And if you had my eyes, you'd see a palace for you and me. A palace for you and me.
So, just like you, it's a very powerful story that we're telling. of a student who goes to visit a sage, and the sage has nothing in his house. And he says, "Where's your couches? Where's your chandelier?" And he says back to the student, "Where's all your stuff? You just have a suitcase." And the student responds, "But I'm just passing through." And that's when the sage says, "Aha, I'm just like you. I'm also just passing through. This world is temporary."
Where people spend most of their life collecting stuff. Essentially, that's what we do. So we have garages for our stuff. And the sage tells them, "I'm actually just like you. I also collect stuff. It's just not that type of stuff. Not leather couches and chandeliers. I collect treasures of another kind."
So in the second verse, there's a line: "The neighbors talk, but they don't understand." That's another message that he's giving over, is not to be influenced or not to be worried what others will think. Societal pressures or societal norms. And, he stays focused on that higher goal. And he's trying to convey that. The whole song, he's trying to convey that. And it's something that we always have to keep in mind, because it's just so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day. It's just impossible to avoid it. So it's like a constant push that I think we have to try to find a way to connect to that.
This song is actually from our brand new album, Inner Flame. And we're coming to the National Jewish Retreat. We performed there before, but we're coming back for the 10th annual, and we've got